The piercing sound of breaking dishes cut through the bustling restaurant, momentarily silencing the lively conversations. All eyes turned to the young waitress with dark hair, who was visibly trembling, her eyes fixed on a man sitting a few feet away. Her face was a mix of shock and fury, as if she had just uncovered a devastating truth. "You," she whispered, her voice laden with emotion. "You are him." Emily never imagined that her routine shift at the Fifth Avenue Bistro would turn into the moment that would change her life forever. For years, she had carried an emptiness in her heart, a missing piece in the puzzle of her existence. Growing up without a father had left invisible scars, unanswered questions that haunted her in her quietest moments. Her mother, Sarah, was a pillar of strength and love, but Emily always felt the weight of the silence that hung over the subject of her father. Sarah's eyes, usually warm and welcoming, took on a melancholy sheen every time Emily mustered the courage to ask about the man she had never known. That night, as Emily served tables with her usual efficiency, her ears caught a familiar name coming from a corner table. A middle-aged man, dressed in an expensive suit, laughed loudly with his friends, boasting about his achievements. "Do you guys remember Sarah?" he said, his tone arrogant. "That naive girl who thought she could trap me. As if I would give up everything for a one-night mistake." Emily's world stopped. Sarah. Her mother. The pieces began to fit together with painful clarity. This man, this arrogant stranger, was the reason her mother cried silently on the nights she thought Emily was asleep. Without thinking, Emily approached the table, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The next words that left her mouth would change the course of many lives. "You are Thomas Bennett," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "You are my father." The ensuing silence was deafening. Thomas, the man Emily had just confronted, looked at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. His friends, once jovial, now watched the scene with evident discomfort. Emily felt the weight of all the years of absence, all the unanswered questions, all her mother's nights of silent crying converging in this single moment. She didn't know what to expect: denial, anger, perhaps even a belated apology. But nothing could prepare her for what happened next. Thomas rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. For a brief moment she saw something, recognition, regret, pass through his eyes. But as quickly as it appeared, it was replaced by a mask of indifference. "I don't know what you're talking about, girl," he said coldly, tossing a few bills onto the table. "Come on, guys. This place has lost its charm." As Thomas and his friends made their way to the exit, Emily felt her legs weaken. Years of repressed emotions threatened to overflow. But she stood firm, determined not to let this man see how much he had affected her. As the restaurant door closed behind Thomas, Emily knew this wasn't the end, but just the beginning. A journey of discovery, forgiveness, and perhaps healing was about to begin. And she was determined to face every moment, no matter how painful it might be. The restaurant manager, concerned, approached Emily. "Are you okay? Do you need a moment?" Emily took a deep breath, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed rising within her. "No," she replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I need to finish my shift. And then I need to have a very important conversation with my mother." As she returned to work, Emily knew nothing would be the same. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was ready to face the truth, no matter where it led her. The apartment was silent when Emily arrived home, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She found Sarah sitting at the dining room table, flipping through an old photo album under the dim light of a lamp. Upon seeing her daughter, Sarah quickly closed the album, but not before Emily caught a glimpse of a familiar photo. Her mother, much younger, smiling beside a man she now recognized. "Mom," Emily began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Sarah looked at her daughter, immediately noticing the change in her eyes. There was a mix of pain and determination she had never seen before. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked, her heart racing with an unexplainable fear. Emily sat down beside her mother, holding her hands. "I saw him today, Mom. Thomas Bennett. My father." The sound of breaking glass cut through the air as Sarah dropped the glass of water she was holding. Her eyes widened, a mix of fear and shock taking over her face. How did you?" "He was at the restaurant," Emily explained softly. "I heard him talking about you." "About?" Sarah closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Years of carefully guarded secrets crumbled before her. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to protect you. I thought I was doing the right thing." Emily felt her own vision blur with tears. Why, Mom? Why didn't you ever tell me about him? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I was young and naive when I met Thomas. He was charming, successful, and I fell hopelessly in love. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought we would become a family. But Thomas, he had other plans. Sarah's voice trembled as she continued. He told me he wasn't ready to be a father, that his career was more important. He offered money to fix the problem. When I refused, he simply disappeared. Emily felt a wave of anger rise within her, but also a deep sadness for the pain her mother had carried alone for so many years. Why didn't you tell me before? Sarah gently cupped her daughter's face. I didn't want you to grow up feeling rejected or unloved. I thought if you didn't know about him, maybe the pain would be less. But now I see that maybe it was a mistake. You deserve to know the truth. A heavy silence fell over them, years of unspoken emotions hanging in the air. Emily thought about the man she saw at the restaurant, arrogant, cold, so different from the image she had created in her mind over the years. Part of her wanted to hate him, but another part longed for answers, for a chance to understand. What happened after he left? Emily asked softly. Sarah smiled sadly. I had you, my love. You became my whole world. Every smile, every achievement reminded me that I had made the right choice. It wasn't easy, but watching you grow, it was the greatest joy of my life. Emily hugged her mother tightly, feeling the unconditional love that had always been there, even in the hardest moments. I love you, Mom. And I'm so sorry for everything you went through. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. Don't be, sweetheart. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. But now that you know the truth, what do you want to do? Emily gently pulled away, her eyes shining with new determination. I want answers, Mom. Not just for me, but for both of us. Thomas Bennett may not want to be part of our lives, but he needs to face the past. We deserve that. Sarah nodded slowly, a mix of fear and pride in her eyes. You're right, honey. It won't be easy, but we'll face this journey together. As mother and daughter embraced again, Emily knew the days ahead would be challenging. But for the first time, she felt she had all the pieces of her life's puzzle. Now it was time to put them together and face whatever the future held. Outside, the night fell over the city, streetlights flickering on one by one. Somewhere out there, Thomas Bennett continued his life, unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed growing inside her. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new journey, a quest not just for answers, but for healing and perhaps redemption. The sun had barely risen when Emily left home, determination shining in her eyes. She had spent the night researching, scouring every piece of information she could find about Thomas Bennett. Now, with an address in hand and her heart pounding, she headed for his office. The imposing building loomed before her, a monument to the success Thomas had chosen over his family. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of unanswered questions on her shoulders. In the elevator, she met a middle-aged woman, elegantly dressed, who looked at her with curiosity. First day, the woman asked with a kind smile. Emily hesitated. Actually, I'm here to see Thomas Bennett. The woman's smile faltered for a moment. Oh, you must be the new intern. I'm Linda, Mr. Bennett's executive assistant. She extended her hand. Something in Linda's kindness touched Emily. Without thinking, she found herself confiding, actually, I'm his daughter. The shock on Linda's face was quickly replaced by compassion. Oh dear, she whispered, gently squeezing Emily's arm. Come with me. Instead of taking her directly to Thomas's office, Linda guided Emily to an empty break room. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked softly. Emily nodded, tears threatening to fall. I need answers. Linda sighed, her eyes filled with a sadness Emily hadn't expected to see. Thomas, he's not an easy man. I've worked with him for years and, well, there are things you need to know. Over the next few minutes, Linda shared a story Emily could never have imagined. Thomas, the cold and arrogant man she had encountered at the restaurant, carried his own demons. He never got over the loss of his parents when he was young, Linda explained. He grew up determined never to feel vulnerable again, never to rely on anyone. When your mother got pregnant, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He panicked. He ran from the only thing that could have healed his wounded heart. Emily felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and an unexpected tinge of compassion. But that doesn't justify what he did, she said, her voice trembling. Linda nodded. No, it doesn't, but perhaps it helps to understand. Emily, in the past few months, I've noticed a change in him. He's been quieter, more introspective. Last week, I caught him looking at an old photo, A photo of a young woman who I now know was your mother." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think he regrets it?" "I think he's finally facing the ghosts of the past," Linda replied softly. "And now you're here. Maybe it's time for healing to begin for all of you." Emily felt a wave of gratitude for this woman who, in just a few minutes, had given her more context and understanding than she had hoped to find. "Thank you, Linda," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. Linda smiled, squeezing Emily's hand. "Remember, dear, sometimes the hardest people to love are the ones who need it most. That doesn't mean you have to forgive him immediately or accept any excuse. It just means there's always more to a person's story than what we see at first glance." With one last encouraging hug from Linda, Emily stood up, ready to face Thomas. She didn't know what to expect, but she now carried with her not just her own experiences but a glimpse of her father's complex and imperfect humanity. As she walked toward Thomas's office, Emily felt a shift within herself. The anger was still there, but now it was accompanied by a deeper determination, not just to confront but to understand. And maybe, just maybe, to find a path to the healing they all so desperately needed. Linda watched Emily walk away, a silent prayer on her lips. She knew that the next moments could change lives forever. And in her heart, she hoped that this unlikely reunion could be the beginning of something beautiful, even if born from pain. Emily's heart pounded as she stood before the imposing oak door of Thomas Bennett's office. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, the weight of years of unanswered questions pressing down on her shoulders. With a deep breath, she opened the door. Thomas was seated behind a massive desk, his graying hair neatly combed, his suit immaculate. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face at the unexpected interruption. But when his eyes met Emily's, recognition dawned, and the color drained from his face. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily stepped forward, her chin held high despite the tremor in her voice. "Yes, me. Your daughter." For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words and buried emotions. The carefully constructed world of Thomas seemed to crumble around him as he faced the living proof of his past choices. I don't know what to say," Thomas finally managed, his usual confidence shaken. Emily felt a surge of anger, but Linda's words echoed in her mind. She took a deep breath to steady herself. "You could start with the truth. Why did you abandon us?" Thomas's shoulders slumped, the weight of his secrets finally too much to bear. "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice laden with regret. "When your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I thought I wasn't ready, that I would mess everything up." As Thomas spoke, Emily saw not the successful businessman, but a scared young man trapped in the past. "My parents died when I was young," he continued, each word seeming to age him. "I grew up believing that love meant loss, that family meant pain. So I ran. I threw myself into work, built this empire, thinking it would fill the void." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. "Did it?" Thomas looked around his luxurious office, a bitter smile on his face. "Not even close. Every success felt hollow. Every achievement reminded me of what I had given up." A hiccup caught in Emily's throat. "We needed you. Mom fought so hard and I always wondered why I wasn't enough for you to stay." Thomas stood abruptly, his own eyes shining. "Oh, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "It was never about you not being enough. I wasn't enough. I was too broken, too scared to be the father you deserved." At that moment, the walls between them crumbled. Emily saw not a monster who had abandoned her, but a flawed, wounded human being who had made a terrible mistake. And Thomas, looking at the strong, beautiful woman his daughter had become, felt a pride and love he had never allowed himself to experience before. "I know I have no right to ask," Thomas said softly, "but is there any chance we could start over?" Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, hope, and a desperate longing for the father she never had. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "There's so much pain, so much lost time." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you'll let me." As they stood there, father and daughter, separated by years of absence but united by an unbreakable bond of blood, a tentative hope began to bloom. It wouldn't be easy. There were wounds that needed to heal, trust that needed to be rebuilt. But in that office, surrounded by symbols of material success, something far more valuable was taking root: the possibility of a real family. Emily thought of her mother, of the years of silent suffering she had endured. "It's not just about us," she said. "Mom deserves answers too. She deserves peace." Thomas's face softened at the mention of Sarah. "You're right," he agreed. I owe her more than I can ever repay. But I want to try. Will you help me? As Emily looked at her father, she saw a reflection of herself. The same determination, the same capacity to love, and the same fear of getting hurt. In that moment she made a choice. Not to forget the past, but to forge a new future. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I'll help. But not for you. For us. For the family we could have been, and maybe still can be. The afternoon sun painted the sky in golden hues as Emily and Thomas left the imposing corporate building. The silence between them was heavy, laden with years of absence and unspoken words. Emily felt her heart pounding, a confusing mix of emotions rushing through her veins. I think we need to talk to Mom, Emily said softly, breaking the silence. Thomas nodded, his face a mask of regret and apprehension. As they walked side by side along the busy sidewalk, Emily couldn't help but notice how people looked at Thomas with admiration and respect. To the world he was a business titan, an epitome of success. But to her, he was a familiar stranger, a puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. How are we going to do this? Thomas asked, his voice betraying a vulnerability Emily had never imagined he possessed. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. I'll call her. I think it would be best to meet in a neutral place. Minutes later, they were seated in a quiet cafe, waiting for Sarah to arrive. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Emily barely noticed, her stomach a knot of anxiety. When Sarah entered the cafe, her eyes immediately found Emily's. Then she saw Thomas. The shock on her face was palpable, a mix of old pain and confusion. What is going on here? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily stood up, hugging her mother tightly. Mom, I know this is a surprise, but I think it's time we face the past. All of us. Sarah sat down, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. The man she had once loved, the man who had hurt her so deeply, was sitting there, looking as lost as she felt. Sarah, Thomas began, his voice hoarse with emotion. I know that nothing I say can erase what I've done. But I want you to know how deeply I regret it. Every day of the last 20 years, I've carried the weight of my choices. Tears began to roll down Sarah's face. Why now, Thomas? Why after all this time? Emily held her mother's hand, offering silent comfort as Thomas struggled to find the right words. Because I was a coward for far too long, he admitted, the raw truth in his voice. Because our daughter had the courage I never had. She confronted me, forced me to face what I had done. Sarah looked at Emily, pride and love shining through her tears. Oh my dear, she whispered. In the minutes that followed, long-buried truths came to light. Thomas spoke of his own childhood traumas, the paralyzing fear of failing as a father. Sarah shared the pain of raising a daughter alone, the nights of loneliness and doubt. And Emily, sitting between the two, felt like a bridge, not only between her father and mother, but between the past and the future they might build together. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Thomas said, his voice choked. I know I don't deserve it. But if you both will allow me, I'd like to try to do things the right way this time. Sarah looked at Emily, seeking guidance in her daughter's eyes. Emily felt the weight of that moment, knowing her response could shape their future. I think we deserve a chance to heal, Emily said softly. All of us. That sunny afternoon in an ordinary cafe, 3 wounded souls took their first hesitant steps toward healing. The road ahead would be long and at times painful. There would be moments of doubt, of resurgent anger, of old wounds reopening. But there, in that moment, there was also hope. A fragile hope, born from the courage to face the truth and the transformative power of forgiveness. As they left the cafe, Emily between Sarah and Thomas, she felt something shift inside her. The emptiness she had carried for so long was beginning to be filled not with simple answers, but with the promise of a new beginning. In the weeks that followed the cafe meeting, Emily found herself navigating a sea of turbulent emotions. Thomas's presence in her life, once a painful void, was now a complex and challenging reality. On a sunny afternoon, Emily decided to visit her childhood home. The small apartment where she and Sarah had built a life together held memories that now seemed to belong to another life. As she entered, the familiar scent of jasmine enveloped her, bringing tears to her eyes. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea, her face a mix of love and concern. How are you, dear? Sarah asked, placing a steaming cup in front of Emily. Emily held the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers. Confused, she admitted. Sometimes I feel angry. Other times I feel hope. It's strange having a father after so long. Sarah sat next to her daughter, her eyes full of understanding. I know how hard it is. Thomas is trying, but years of absence don't disappear overnight. Emily nodded, a question that had long tormented her finally finding its voice. Mom, do you still love him? The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of unspoken emotions. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes distant as if looking at a past long buried. Love, she began softly, is complicated, Emily. Part of me will always love the young man Thomas was, the man I thought he would become. But I've also learned to love the life we've built, you and me. Emily felt a lump in her throat. I feel like I'm betraying you trying to get to know him. Sarah took her daughter's hands in hers. Oh my love, you're not betraying anyone. You have the right to get to know your father, to form your own opinion about him. At that moment, Emily's phone vibrated. It was a message from Thomas, asking if she would like to have dinner with him over the weekend. Emily looked at the message, feeling a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. He's trying, Emily said, showing the message to Sarah. Sarah smiled gently. Yes, he is. And that's more than I ever expected. Emily ran her fingers through her hair, frustration in her voice. But what if it's not enough? What if, after all this, he disappoints us again? Sarah held Emily's face in her hands, her eyes conveying years of love and strength. Then we will continue just as we always have. But Emily, giving him a chance doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means making room for a new future. Her mother's words touched something deep in Emily. She realized that courage wasn't just in confronting Thomas, but in allowing herself to be vulnerable, in risking her heart in the hope of healing. You are the strongest person I know, Emily said, hugging her mother tightly. Sarah laughed softly. I had a great teacher, she replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. As the sun set, painting the small apartment in golden hues, Emily felt a new determination grow inside her. The road ahead would be difficult, full of painful conversations and uncomfortable moments. But for the first time she saw the possibility of a complete family, not perfect but real and full of love. Emily picked up her phone and with trembling fingers replied to Thomas's message. Dinner sounds great. I have many questions. As she sent the message, Emily felt as though she were turning a page. The future was uncertain, but it was full of possibilities. And she was ready to explore them, one step at a time, with her mother's unwavering love as her anchor and the promise of a new connection with her father as her horizon. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small cafe where Emily was waiting. Her fingers nervously drummed on the table as she watched the door, waiting for Thomas's arrival. A year had passed since that fateful afternoon when she confronted her father for the first time. The doorbell jingled and Thomas entered, his eyes immediately finding Emily's. He smiled, a gesture that still seemed a bit strange on his face but genuine. Emily felt a familiar warmth in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but a growing affection she never imagined she would feel for this man. Hi Dad, she said softly, the words still new on her tongue. Thomas sat down, his eyes shining with contained emotion. Hi sweetheart. How are you? Emily smiled, thinking about how to answer that seemingly simple question. I'm fine. Actually, I'm more than fine. I feel whole. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. The last year had been a journey of highs and lows, of difficult conversations and moments of deep understanding. Emily remembered the nights she cried in her mother's arms, struggling with anger and forgiveness. She thought of the uncomfortable dinners with Thomas, where silence was broken by hesitant questions and cautious answers. But she also remembered the day Thomas showed up at her graduation, proud and humble at the same time. Sarah's birthday, when the three of them managed to laugh together for the first time. Small moments that added up began to fill the void of years of absence. Let me know if you need any further help. Emily, Thomas began, his voice trembling slightly, I have something for you. He took a small package from his pocket and placed it on the table. Emily carefully opened it, revealing a delicate silver locket. Inside there was an old photograph, Sarah, young and radiant, holding a baby in her arms. Beside her, a younger Thomas smiled, his eyes full of a happiness Emily had never seen before. I've kept this all these years, Thomas said softly. It was a reminder of what I had lost, what I threw away out of fear. Now, I want it to be a symbol of what we're rebuilding. Emily felt warm tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hand trembled as she touched the photo, a window to a past she never knew and a future she was just beginning to imagine. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. In that moment, Emily understood that healing wasn't a destination but a journey. Every difficult conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every small act of love was a step on this journey. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it opened doors to a future full of possibilities. As father and daughter talked, sharing stories and dreams, Emily felt a peace she had never experienced before. The emptiness she had carried for so long was being filled not just by Thomas's love, but by the courage to open up, to risk, to believe in the possibility of healing. Outside the cafe, Sarah passed by, watching the scene through the window. Her heart filled with a mix of joy and melancholy as she saw Emily and Thomas together. She knew her role in this story was changing, but she felt grateful to have been the anchor that kept Emily strong all these years. Emily saw her mother and waved, inviting her to join them. When Sarah sat down, completing the trio, Emily looked at the faces of her parents. One familiar and loved, the other still new and full of promises. She smiled, feeling the weight of the locket against her chest, a tangible reminder that love, even wounded, can bloom again. Emily's journey was not over. There was still much to discover, much to heal. But here, in this cafe, with the afternoon sun bathing them in a golden light, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The future, once a vast unknown, now shone with the promise of new memories, new bonds, and a love that, though late, was deep and true. Emily was ready to write the next chapters of her story, no longer alone, but with her newly formed family by her side. And so, with open hearts and renewed hope, Emily, Sarah, and Thomas took their first steps together toward a future none of them could have imagined, but all of them longed to embrace. So, guys, what did you think of this incredible story? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked it and want more intense stories like this, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the Soul and History channel. It helps our channel grow and lets us bring more exciting adventures to you. Until the next story.